Sometimes things will go wrong when we're out on the water and we might have to come up with a quick fix, kind of like my man did right here when his inner tubes went out on his inflatable, and just like some of the things we'll see in this week's episode of Boating News of the Week. Our first story to make the boating news this week is going to take us over to Turkey, where this was the scene just a little over a week ago when the 700-foot cruise liner Celestial Journey was coming into a Turkish port when all of a sudden the crew miscalculated the pace they were coming in at, wound up coming in a little hot, and had to make some last-second adjustments such as dropping the anchor to try and slow the massive cruise liner down. Unfortunately, the crew's actions were too little too late, as we'll see in a few moments, as this cruise liner winds up colliding with the pier with the bow bulb of the vessel. Now, fortunately in this situation, no major damage was caused to the vessel. There is some damage, as we'll see in a few moments, to the pier, but nothing serious enough to stop the cruise line from moving on to its next destination after leaving this island. At the time of the incident, there were approximately 1,700 people on board the cruise and almost 600 crew members at the time as well. Fortunately, in this situation, no injuries were reported, which is pretty good news. And speaking of hitting things, we're going to stay on that path, as our next story to make the boating news this week is going to involve another collision, but this time it won't be with a pier. It's going to be two large cargo vessels, and it's going to take us over toward the coast of Sicily, where this incident occurred this past Monday when two cargo vessels were traversing off the coast of Sicily and they wound up colliding. The two vessels that were involved in the incident were the Liberian-flagged Harai Anna and the Portuguese-flagged EF Olivia. The incident occurred approximately 14 nautical miles off the southern tip of Sicily, and fortunately in the incident, no injuries had been reported, but it did require a response from local Navy and the Italian Coast Guard, as both ships did suffer damage during the incident. The Italian Coast Guard wound up launching multiple aircraft and several patrol boats to the scene, while the ships were investigated to make sure they were in good enough condition to attempt to make it back into port. Fortunately, in this situation, neither vessel was found to be taking on water and were instructed to head toward the port of Augusta, while they would be closely followed by the Italian Coast Guard to make sure everything went smoothly. Fortunately, both vessels wind up making it back into port successfully, once again with no injuries involved in the incident. But in this one, right now, the big mystery is still why the two vessels collided. At this time, an investigation has been launched to try and determine the cause of the incident, but no official reasoning has been issued. So at this time, we're still not sure if this was an incident of mechanical failure, human error, or some combination of the two. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to take us over to the Bahamas, where this was the scene just a little over a week and a half ago, when the Coast Guard Air Station Clearwater wound up receiving a distress signal from a vessel just off of Horn Cay in the Bahamas. The vessel was a 73-foot boat traversing through the Bahamas when all of a sudden the vessel wound up hitting rough weather with two people on board, and the next thing they knew, the rough weather wound up forcing them onto land and the crew found themselves stuck on Horn Cay. The Coast Guard did wind up launching a rescue helicopter to go to the scene. They did lower a rescue swimmer down to the ground where they could get on board the vessel to check and make sure the two mariners were in good health. Both the mariners were then airlifted off of the island and taken back to Linden Pendling Airport back in Nassau. No injuries were reported during the incident, and crews are currently working with local salvage operations to return to try and get the 73-foot vessel off the island. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to be a wild one you'd almost expect to see straight out of a movie, and it's going to take us back to March 31st when a crew of 3 set out on a fishing trip. The crew were fishing along the Pikelot Atoll when all of a sudden their 20-foot vessel wound up getting struck by a rogue wave and wound up crashing into the reef, damaging their outboard motor, forcing the crew to have no choice but to abandon ship and seek refuge on the abandoned island. Fortunately, the crew quickly jumped into action and wound up getting palm leaves together and writing the word help in the sand, which wound up basically saving their lives, as this was spotted by a Coast Guard aircraft.
The help sign was pretty visible. We could see it from a couple thousand feet up in the air. While they were fishing, they ran their boat into a coral reef and put a hole in the bottom of their vessel and started taking on water. They weren't going to be able to make their return home.
Once the Coast Guard spotted this sign, they wound up dropping a relief packet to the men on the island and eventually including a radio so they could start communications with the people who were there. Fortunately, the Coast Guard was able to get a cutter back out to the scene and rescue the 3 men off of the island, basically uninjured. Coast Guard crews commend the men for making the sign, as Micronesia consists of many different islands, making it difficult to try and pinpoint an island somebody may be on. Without this sign, the Coast Guard may have flown over the island the men were on several times and never spotted them, but fortunately they did. Thanks for watching, crew. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Boating News of the Week. If you ever see anything crazy happening out on your waterways, be sure to hit us up on Facebook or Instagram and let us know, and you might see your stories over here. And if you guys haven't already, go ahead and drop an anchor on the subscribe button.